Uh, Welcome back, and let me introduce you Bram from Baserow, who gonna speak about how to build scalable databases and applications without coding.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Bram Wiepjes. I'm the founder of Baserow. And my background is actually in software development. So when I started my professional career of software development, I was actually 15 years old. I was hired by an agency where I learned a lot about software development. I've worked for various other agencies. I've worked for startups. I've worked for large organizations. And during my career, I've learned a lot about how to build scalable web applications from scratch. I always love to have side projects, and I actually did another startup when, it's a couple of years ago. I was very inexperienced at that point, but so I made all the beginner mistakes that you can make when doing a startup. So it was actually a website builder, and that kind of like introduced me with the whole no-code world. So obviously that startup failed at that point, but I checked out all the other no-code tools that were around there. And what I basically noticed is that a lot of no-code tools, they have some problems. Most of the no-code tools, they're SaaS and closed source. That actually means that you need to use their servers of another company to store your data there. And what happens then is that you're very dependent on that company. If that company ever gets acquired, for example, or they change their pricing, you could have like a big problem as a user of that software. Another problem that I noticed is like the scalability. A lot of no-code tools, they don't allow you to store a lot of data in there, to have a lot of API requests. Yeah, that could be problematic if you've built your whole business model around a couple of no-code tools, and at some point you really need to scale. That means you need to do something completely different at that point. It's also not accessible by everyone. There are a lot of large organizations who have strict IT requirements, who work with privacy-sensitive data, for example. And that means that they cannot use these SaaS tools because the data can often not leave their data center because of those reasons. On top of that, there's also like a problem with the API access. Typically, some no-code tools that have some APIs that you can use, but you typically cannot do everything, right? So if you want to build a nice integration with certain software, you sometimes cannot do it. And then there's also the problem of data ownership. If you store your data on the servers of other SaaS tools, it means you don't own it. So if they would make a mistake in their backup process or something goes wrong from a technical point of view, they could, for example, lose your data without you having any control over it. So with all that in mind, I actually started Baserow, and I wanted to solve all these problems. So at Baserow, we focus a lot at the performance. So we do things in a slightly different technical way that makes it a bit more complex to build it, but it actually allows us to scale much more. We also don't want to just offer a hosted version, a SaaS version of our product. So we built Baserow open source. That means that all the source code is visible and everyone can make changes to it. It's a very good deal it's a safe bet for a lot of organizations, because if something happens to our organization, maybe we get acquired, we change our pricing drastically, they still have the code, right? They could still self-host it on their own servers, and they would have the code. They could still continue working on it. They could, if we stop development for whatever reason, they could, for example, continue the development themselves, or there could be another company or community managers who would continue the development for it. There's also the part of like the Baserow is API first, and that also means that everything that you can do in the tool, you can also do that via an API, and that allows you to make powerful integrations with the software. You can do like everything with the API that you can do in the tool as well. We also think it's important to make it possible to extend the code, right? So There are a lot of successful open source projects out there, and they're very successful because they allow plugins, for example. So take a look at WordPress. They have 50,000 plugins. If you cannot do something with their CMS, there's always a plugin that you can use. And I think that's also very important for no-code software to use as well. And it's also typically when you use an open source product, it's usually by developers for developers. That's something we also wanted to do differently. So we want to offer like a great user experience, a user experience that's comparable with all the top SaaS tools, the top SaaS no-code tools out there. We think it's very important that you do that with an open source project as well, that you have like the same level of user experience. So that being said, in this presentation, I want to cover a couple of topics. I want to explain what Baserow actually is to you. And then I want to switch to a live demo where I'm going to show you how Baserow works with high volumes of data, what the best practices are to keep your database performant, how you can use Baserow as a backend, for example, via the API. And since AI is the theme of this summit, I also want to share some words of what our vision on that is, and share a bit more about the long-term plans of Baserow. So what is Baserow actually? So Baserow is an open source no-code database. It allows our users to create, in essence, they're creating tables. In those tables, they can create fields, which are basically the columns. And we have many field types that you can use. So we have simpler field types like text or a number or a date or something like that. But also more complex field types where we call it the single select field, where you have like a drop down or where you can very easily drag and drop a file into a cell and upload it there. Of course, it's also possible to work with that data directly. You can update it, you can delete it, but you can also visualize that data in a different way if you want to. So the interface looks a little bit like a spreadsheet because people are familiar with those kind of tools, and that's also part of the user experience that we want to offer. But you can also visualize things on like a Kanban view, a calendar view, a gallery view, things like that. So yeah, as I said, even though it's an open source product, you don't need technical experience to work with it. We want to offer a great user experience that's accessible for a lot of users, but it doesn't mean the tool is not developer friendly. You can create plugins, you have the whole API that you can connect with. And you also can collaborate in real time in the tool directly. So if someone else makes a change in the data, you would immediately see that change happening if you're looking at the same data. This makes sure that you're always looking at the most recent version of the data, which is important, especially if you collaborate with a bigger team on data. If you have like 20 people, and they're all making changes constantly. You just want to see that happening in real time. That's a very important aspect. But also the security part of it. Like currently we're in the observation phase of becoming SOC 2, GDPR, and HIPAA compliant. It's important for our hosted version and for storing customer data. But if you would self-host Baserow, it's already compliant because you would keep all the data in your own data center. And there are various ways of how you can install Baserow on your own server, for example. We have guides on how to do it on AWS, on how to deploy to Heroku, how to deploy a Docker image, for example. We make it as easy as possible for people to self-host Baserow. Cool. And apart from that, that's like the basic functionality we have. It's also possible to, of course, import files into Baserow via various formats so that you can use that. You can also export it to various formats so that you can use it in other tools if you want. We have a lot of field types. I'm not going to name them all because it's like 20 fields or so, but you can already see it in the slides here. Of course, it's also possible to filter on your data. You could apply filters. You would, if you would, for example, create like a contains filter on a name field, and you set the value to Bram, you would only see rows where that cell actually matches Bram. You can order your data. You can choose which fields you want to show. It's all very user-friendly. We also have enterprise features, which is typically needed in large organizations with like role-based access control, where you can choose per workspace, per database, per table, who has certain permissions to it and what they're allowed to do and what they're allowed to see. We also have single sign-on, an audit log, things like that. But in terms of like the collaboration, it's also very important that it's not just real-time collaboration. You can also leave like comments and mention people and receive notifications and things like that. So what I want to do is I want to switch to a demo. So I'm just going to show you live how Baserow works. I want to show you how fast Baserow is with a lot of data in there. I want to show you like some tips and tricks on how you can keep it fast, even if you scale to maybe like 1 million rows or something like that, and how you can use the API where you can connect your application and use Baserow as a backend, and what kind of permission system we have implemented there. So I'm gonna stop these slides, and now I need to change the system setting here so that you can see what I'm seeing here. I need a small moment for that. Cool. Yeah, so what you're seeing here, let me refresh this page. This is actually running Baserow on my laptop right now. So this is a form of self-hosting. It doesn't run in a data center right now, but it's just on my machine. I wasn't sure how fast the internet was going to be, so I thought, let's just run it on my local machine and yeah, see the full power of what it can do. This is the dashboard. It's a simple overview of all the workspaces that you have and all the databases that you have here as well. What I want to show you is this database first. I've just filled this, I created 4 tables, and I'm not sure how well you can all read this, but it says here 100,000 rows and 10 fields. This is 100,000 rows and 20 fields, 250,000, 500,000 rows. So you already saw how fast this loads. If I would switch to the second table, for example, there are like 20 fields in here. It's almost instant if you want to open it. Of course, this is also because I'm running it locally on my machine. It means there's less internet latency. But if I switch to this table, for example, there's like 250,000 rows in here. And there's like 30 fields or like 500,000 rows. It's almost instant, right? The loading time is less than a second. So to build a scalable database, Baserow does a lot of things for you out of the box, right? You don't have to worry about complex technical things. If you want to run a search query, for example, Baserow automatically creates a full text search index for you. That means that it's fast, that you can search through many rows, even if you have like 1 million rows. It will take 1 or 2 seconds to complete that search query. The same happens for when you apply a sort, for example. If I'm going to sort by this name, doesn't matter which direction, with or without the search query. It automatically applies indexes under the hood. You don't have to worry about any of that to keep everything very performant out of the box. Same as with filters, it will make sure that it's all fast. So just by using Baserow, you're already making a good step in the right direction of having a performant database. But there are, of course, things you can do to improve performance even more. So what I'm going to show you here, this is an example of a table. It's not about the number of fields here. It has like 1,000 rows in here, and it has a relationship with this colors table. So if you would have a table with barely any rows in it, like this color table, I just have listed 5 colors here. But what you can see is that the reversed relationship has automatically been created. So from the data side, this is a relationship with the colors table. When you create that one, it automatically creates the reversed relationship. But because you have like 1,000 rows in here, that also means that you can have, every row can have multiple relationships with one single row in the color table. So what you want to avoid in this case, let's imagine you have like 100,000 rows, for example, here. That means that every color could have like 200,000 or 20,000 relationships here. And when you open this for the first time, it means that it just loads 5 rows, but it needs to load a lot of these relationships as well. If you have a lot of data, this can cause big performance problems when you want to fetch or update one of these rows. So what we implemented in Baserow is the option to not create a reversed field, as we call it. So if you uncheck this checkbox and you hit the save button, in this table it will still work as expected, but in the other table it will not show that field anymore. It like completely removes it from that side. So Baserow doesn't have to load that data of those rows in here right now. So now it's super fast again. It's a small tweak, but if you don't notice, and we had multiple users and customers who were complaining about, hey, it's you claim it's super fast, but in this case it's actually not. We told them, hey, hit that checkbox and see if you don't actually need that reversed relationship. And then the performance increased by like 20 or 30 times for them. Another example is the number of fields that you have. We see that a lot of our users, they create a lot of fields, like a lot of like lookup fields, linked to other tables. They make a lot of fields, and they actually don't need half of them. So check your fields. Like in this table, it has like 200 fields in there, which is quite a lot. And I can imagine if you have like a lot of views and you hide or show certain fields in those views, you might not actually, you can easily lose the overview of how many fields you would actually have. But if you have a lot of fields, it could mean that if you update a cell, for example, in another table, which a link or a lookup or a formula depends on that cell, it could easily mean that if you update one cell value, that it actually needs to update 1,000 or 2,000 rows in some cases, because you have that many fields. So if you have the possibility of reducing the number of fields, then you should do so, because it will make the performance much faster in this case. But as you can see here, this table doesn't have many rows, but if you look at the loading time, if I would switch from this table to the other one, it is still relatively fast. So reduce the number of fields, it's going to help you a lot in terms of performance. And another thing is data normalization. So in the example here, I have created 2 tables. A quote table. Let's imagine you have like a web shop or something like that, or an agency. You have like a table where you store all your quotes. It's a super simple example where I just added like a quote number, a price, and some customer data. I just added 2 customer fields here, which is like a customer name and a customer address. But imagine sometimes you want to store much more data. What a lot of people also do is, in the other table, they would actually create and store duplicates of that data, which results in your fields increasing a lot, right? If you have like 20 fields for every customer that you need to store, maybe like their address, certain state, certain changes that have happened. And if you need to store that in every table, it will increase the number of fields in your table by a lot. So what I always recommend doing is creating another table. In this case, I'm going to name it customer, for example. I'm going to make a relationship to that table and normalize the data, as you would call it. So I'm just going to call this customer, for example. We don't need a reversed relationship in this case. And what you want to do is you just want to store the data there. So in this case, I'm just going to rename this field to like address. I should be able to copy this data directly in here. And instead of, I would just make a relationship to that user. And then you use like lookup fields if you need specific data in that table. It would make it much faster. Cool, so what I'm going to do is switch back to the presentation again. So I need to change my display settings. Cool. So we also wanted to share a few words on AI. Because Baserow is open source, you can self-host it. We think it's very important that you maintain that with the generative AI models that you see that everyone is implementing in their NoCode tool. There's a lot of things and features you can come up with to improve the no-code developer experience, to enhance data, for example. But what we really want to do is with Baserow, we're going to work on that next year, so you can expect some AI features for us on that front as well. But what we really want to do is give users the option to choose what kind of generative AI model they want to use. You could, for example, say we do like public cloud, ChatGPT as generative AI model, or you could do a private cloud in Azure with ChatGPT. But for a lot of people, they might want to keep the data in their data center so that they, for example, can run it in an air-gapped environment where you don't necessarily have the ability to connect to an Azure server or a public ChatGPT cloud. This is possible. Meta, for example, has introduced Llama 2 models, which are actually open source. They're very high quality, and you can completely self-host that within your own environment. So the data that you send to it, it doesn't leave your data center. So that's something we want to build into Baserow in the self-hosted environment, that it would automatically use those models. And optionally, you can, of course, switch to another model if you want to use that. It's the most privacy sensitive way that you can implement this. In terms of features, what we see for AI is we want to support no-code developers in actually building applications, and that could be by having like a documentation that you can, like a model that you can ask questions with, like how do I create a new field in Baserow? How should this database look like? And then the model can give you answers directly in the tool. But we also want to use it for enhancing data, direct data that you have in Baserow, right? So if you, for example, have, think of like an AI field, for example, where you can have, where you can make a prompt that you can ask the AI, where you would have like variables that you could pick from your, from the row that you're editing, and it would automatically give those answers using the model that you've chosen in your self-hosting option. Yeah, so I also want to share a bit more about like the long-term plan of Baserow. At the moment, we're very focused at the database, as you just saw. This is like our core product, and this is also where we started the product, right? If you are a normal developer, like a code developer, and you're going to build an application, the first thing that you're going to think about is the database. So you're going to think about, hey, how am I going to structure this database? What am I going to store in it? What database engine am I going to use? So for NoCode, it made a lot of sense for us to first implement the database. But what we really want to build is a whole tool chain that has everything that you need to build custom software as a no-code developer. So it's not just a database. The next step is like an application builder where that works seamlessly together with the database. It's all in the same tool, but it will allow you to connect to other data sources. It will allow you to build like portals, for example. So if you're, for example, a marketing agency or a marketing department, you usually work with the people internally on the database, right? So maybe you have a project management use case where you have as a super simple example, you have like a projects table and a tasks table. You have a team of 20 people or maybe more. Everyone can work directly in that database who works at the company. But there might be other stakeholders who need to have access to that data, and maybe you make manual reports for them from time to time. But you could also improve on that. You could, for example, build a portal where your customer, in this case the end user, could sign into, and then automatically only see the right data that they should have access to. That's kind of like the problem that you want to solve with the application builder, and you can have very complex permissions on that as well. You can define in your database which customer might have access to which project, for example, and based on that data, you can only fetch the right data in your application that customer is supposed to see. So it's kind of like a way of allowing external users access to the data that you have in your database. We also think it's very important to have automations in there. We're not sure how it's going to work yet, but you should be able to have like triggers. You've probably seen a bunch of automation tools, all of you. You should be able to have like triggers when a row is created. You might want to send an email as a super simple example. We think if you combine these three things in one single tool with all the values in mind of open source, of self-hosting, of data ownership, of API first and the scalability, then you have something that's extremely powerful, that a lot of people can use, not just the select people in the market. And if you can extend it with plugins, you can add all the missing functionality you might want to have and that you might not get with, would never get with other no-code tools. All right. So, does anyone have any questions about all of this? Yeah.
Yes. One moment.
We are a team of we are from the Netherlands, and we work at a company that also makes business applications, and we deal with a lot of data also.
Yeah.
We see a lot of different type of databases, but I wonder what database is being used in the background for Baserow, and is it also possible to load in an existing database and, for example, have it automatically know which field types to use for which types of data?
Yeah, so the underlying database of Baserow, the technical database, is a PostgreSQL database. So for every table that's created in Baserow, we actually create a table in Postgres, and that's mainly for performance reasons, so that we can apply the right indexes to it to keep it performant. But we think our vision of Baserow is that it should be like a turnkey solution. So it's you start Baserow, and then you need to load your data in there, and then work with it directly in Baserow. So it's not possible to pick any database that you might have, like a MySQL database or any other tool, because we cannot leverage all the functionalities. We cannot guarantee it's going to be performant. So we just picked one database engine, Postgres. You could, if you self-host, connect directly to that Postgres database and query that data. But we only recommend to do read operations on that, because you have like formulas and field dependencies. If you're going to make changes directly in that data, it could be that you're not updating depending rows or depending cells, for example.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you show us how easy it is to install Baserow? Because personally, I use Airtable.
Yes.
And one of the reasons when I started using Airtable is that it was really simple to get in. Just put on my email and let's go. So how could I launch? No, how could I try Baserow?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. If you just want to try it, we also have like a SaaS, a hosted version of Baserow. If you just want to try it, you can go to baserow.io, click on create account, and you have the same level of how easy it is to create a new account and to just try it out. And if you think, hey, this is interesting, now I really want to self-host, then it's super easy. We have like Docker images that you can use. If you need to have a little bit of technical knowledge in order to make it happen. You could run a single command and it will start a Docker container running Baserow, and it will just work out of the box. It has everything embedded directly in that Docker image. We support various platforms like Heroku, where you just click on one button and then it will install it for you, or Cloud Run, or Render, for example. We have guides on AWS, because some larger organizations, they do want to run it at scale. One of our customers actually had a request for us. They said, hey, we need to have 500 API requests per second. Can you figure out how to do that best on AWS? And what is it going to cost us? So we actually did a huge load test on AWS. You need to buy hardware for about like $2,000 to $3,000 per month to actually do that. But that's a more horizontally approach, where you horizontally scale all your servers, basically, so that you can, on demand, you can lower or increase the number of servers that you want to use. That's much more complex to get that up and running. But yeah, we have a technical support plan where we can help people to make that happen. Do you want to see it like live, how easy it is to run it locally on your own laptop, or?
No, I don't want to.
Or does this answer your question?
Maybe later.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Hey, Thanks for the talk. You mentioned a lot about building applications and also supporting AI. I was wondering if there was any talk or discussion relating to supporting vector database in the future, so people can use that to store their embeddings and combining with the application builder, maybe build their AI apps with Baserow.
Yeah, so what we want to do with the application builder, you don't necessarily have to use it with Baserow. The first integration that we are gonna build is of course an integration with your local Baserow database. But we're gonna support Airtable, HTTP requests, a Postgres database, a MySQL database. All that should be supported and much more, right? People can build plugins to add more integrations to it. So if you say, hey, I want to use your application builder, but not with your database, I want to use like a vector database or some other system. It could be that you need to make an integration for it. It could be that we build it, or maybe someone in the community has already done it. And then you should be able to use that as a data source as well. So that's definitely possible. For our database module, I'm not sure. Maybe at some point we would switch, but for now, we can store a lot of data in there, and it's super performant. There's no need for us to switch to like a vector database. But if you need it for the application builder, it's going to be possible.
Thank you.
Hi. Do you manage user permission and row-level security?
So you can have multiple users, of course. How it works in Baserow is you can have workspaces. In a workspace, you can add like databases, and in the future applications and automations as well. We have role-based access control, but you can only change those permissions on workspace level, database level, and table level. You could say user A has access to nothing except for this table, or the other way around, where you say has access to everything except for this table, for example. The row level permissions, that's really something we want to solve with the application builder, but I wouldn't exclude that we at some point have more granular permissions on row or view or that kind of level. But we think it's best to solve it with the application builder to keep a good overview of who is supposed to do what.
Maybe another question? If not, let's thank you to Bram for amazing presentation.
Yes, thanks for joining, everyone.
And have a small rest. We are continuing in 15 minutes.